The digital organizations of today are conducting many experiments every day, and the results of which are making meaningful changes for the top line of these organizations and for their revenues. So for this panel, we have brought together a complementary set of academic stars to discuss and to debate how IT and information are driving innovation. The panel will explore social media, continuing productivity growth, and the IT function as the master of this great new domain. So please join me in a discussion this morning about how MIT's faculty and staff believes will be the future of organizations. So rather than my giving a long description of each one of my panelists, I'm going to ask each one of them to say who they are and where they're coming from, essentially, how they frame this larger discussion of how IT is changing the internal structure of organizations. And I'm going to begin with my immediate left with Eric Brynjolfsson, who is a professor at MIT's Sloan School of Management and the director of the Center for Digital Business.
Thanks, Jason. It's delightful to be here again. And I remember being here a year ago, and the circumstances were a little more dismal. We were the economy was turning down, but I made a prediction that in time this period would not be looked at as the Great Recession, but as the Great Restructuring. And I think the past 4 quarters have provided some evidence that that's happening. In fact, we've had some very dismal statistics. I'm trained as an economist, and so I certainly see a lot of those numbers. But we've also had some very encouraging numbers. In fact, past 4 quarters have had over 6% productivity growth. If it continues at that pace, living standards will double in just 12 years. And that ultimately may be the most important measure of the strength of an economy. And this is not just a temporary phenomena either. This is part of a longer sweep that we've been mapping out at the Center for Digital Business for some time. In fact, you may be surprised, but if you look at all the decades since World War II, the past decade has actually been the strongest decade in terms of productivity growth and rising living standards. I think the key reason for that is the way companies have been taking advantage of information technology, and more executives and academics are beginning to recognize that and spending time in understanding what are those underlying drivers that's leading to this ever stronger performance.
Thank you. Frank Moss, the famed director of the MIT Media Lab.
Well, I'll accept director of the famed MIT Media Lab, actually. That'd be great. Sometimes famous for being famous. But thank you, Jason. Pleasure to be here. Let me just give you a little bit of my background, because although this is an academic panel, I don't consider myself an academic, at least not by background. I actually graduated MIT here about 30 years ago and then went into business. Became an entrepreneur, founded a number of companies, among which was Tivoli Systems, which later merged with IBM. And then after that, this was about the late 90s, I kind of looked around and said, well, I'm not sure that technology has really had the impact on society and people that I had hoped as a young person graduating MIT, so I got out of the business. Incidentally, I sold mostly to CIOs while I was in my career. And I took kind of a long sabbatical in the biotech business for about 4 or 5 years. I co-founded a biotech company because I had had relatives who had, and friends who had had cancer, and drug discovery is becoming data-driven. But then about 2005, I got a call from the MIT Media Lab, from a headhunter, in fact, and he said, how would you like to be director of the Media Lab? And I said, no thanks, I'm good. Didn't want to go back to academia, but when I went to the lab and viewed what was there, I concluded that it wasn't just famous for being famous, but that what I saw there in terms of how it invented and created, the process by which it did it, as well as the kinds of things the students and the faculty were working on, held great hope for the future. And my belief was that although we could shop and search and socialize online and we all communicate, that information technology had not had a deeper impact on our lives. And I saw that happening at the Media Lab. And so I've been there for about 5 years now. I thought a little bit about how what we do to empower people to take better control of their health, their happiness, their creativity, impacts on IT. I'll just give you a 1 minute on that. If I were in IT today, my primary focus, I think, would be on understanding my customers. Because the technology which has emerged, the personal technologies, the social media, the mobile web, et cetera, has provided extraordinary capabilities for better understanding what motivates your customers, why they buy, what they think, what they like, what they don't like. And that's what constitutes business success in the 21st century. So as an IT professional, I'd be thinking about how I can use the intelligence in that world to make my company smarter. The second thing I'd be thinking about is how to make my people more innovative and creative, not productive. Because innovation and creativity are going to be the key to stock growth and shareholder value in the future. So those are the two things that we do at the Media Lab, but from the perspective of people in society. But our sponsors are mostly industry, and those are the two messages that I tell them.
Thank you, Frank. Jeanne W. Ross, the director of MIT's Center for Information Systems and Research.
Thank you. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here again and to be with this particular group of very interesting and provocative panelists. At the Center for Information Systems Research, we've been studying how companies get value from information technology. And we started addressing that question in 1974, which means that we've been studying really one question for 36 years. And I think the interesting thing is not that we haven't quite answered it, which is, I guess, interesting in itself.
That's my first immediate thought, right?
Getting close, though.
Yeah.
What's great is that the question keeps getting more interesting. And so we're studying a number of phenomena right now, but I think one of them that's particularly relevant for this panel is the growing importance of innovation and the need for IT units to take that challenge and find ways to help the organization innovate. The great irony is that everything we've learned about innovation is that the first thing you need is a solid platform that captures the stable part of the business. So you have something to build on when you're building your innovations and innovative processes. So we've been studying those platforms, and we're trying to understand how you take a platform and build on it and basically tap into the innovative and creative spirit of every single employee, and for that matter, people beyond the organization. So we'll examine that more through the panel.
Thank you, Jeanne. And finally, Marilyn T. Smith, the head of MIT's Information Systems and Technologies, effectively MIT's CIO.
Thank you, Jason. Very interesting, 36 years. Hopefully it won't be another 36 years. I lead MIT's Central IT Department. I've been here about 8 months after spending a career leading IT departments and most recently a business in financial services. My charge is to advance operational excellence and to partner with faculty, students, and administration to support innovation at MIT. And I just wanted to give you a couple of thoughts on IT organizations and specifically my thoughts on our IT organization going forward. As the previous panel talked about, IT has become pervasive and ubiquitous, and everyone's become more dependent on technology in their day-to-day lives to enable and improve their own personal and collective productivity. So expectations are increasing of IT's availability anytime, anywhere, and the role of IT departments is shifting. And what we're focused on now is service provision, project management and delivery, risk management, data management, and innovation in partnership with our customers. So as we have more focus on operational excellence and innovation to achieve it, of all the IT functions, our goal is to make it easier for our customers to do their jobs. And transparency is critical in that also. So the IT customer business partnership, which we've been talking about for years, and I've come to many of these conferences and heard a lot of talk about it, is a critical success factor. And the current and future focus areas for IT include promoting communication and collaboration, not just between IT and the business, but within businesses and across businesses, as the previous panel talked about. So the skills that we're looking for within the IT department include business-focused skills, but the technology-based competencies are also critical. The business-focused skills being business analysis, customer focus, which we were just talking about, is so critical. sourcing management, and execution. And with the global economic crisis, doing more with less has become a stark reality, but it also presents an opportunity. So at MIT, we're very excited in IT, the Information Services and Technology, which is the name of my department, about partnering with the departments, labs, and centers to encourage and to pilot innovation. And I just had a meeting on Friday with 2 faculty members from our Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, and we're already starting to run some of these partnerships. They have some software, they've got an idea, and we're going to be working with them on it. But we have to pick our spots, and effective governance is going to help us do that. So I think I've given you a little bit of an overview of where I'm coming from, and I'll turn it back over to Jason.
Thank you, Marilyn. So let's chat. I know that the people in the audience will have much better and smarter questions than I will. So I'm going to turn the conversation over to you as quickly as I can. So as you sit there, start thinking of some good questions. Around 10:25, I'm going to call you up to the mics on either side of the auditorium. Now, I just heard something interesting, I think, from each one of our panelists. Like Eric, I too am an economist by background, and I remember during the 90s how all economists were astonished by the fact that productivity growth seemed to be occurring in an unparalleled way. It wasn't being constrained by an accompanying growth in inflation. And economists quickly decided that was largely to do with the innovations of IT infrastructure. And specifically what they were doing is they were automating business processes.
Right.
So let's assume that Eric is right and ask if IT is still driving productivity growth, how? What is it actually, what are people investing in right now that is still continuing to drive that kind of productivity growth?
Well, it's continuing some of the trends that started in the 1990s in terms of IT just driving lower costs and process innovation. And that's, I don't want to minimize the importance of that, because that is frankly accounting for the bulk of the productivity growth we're seeing today. But I think more interestingly, more importantly, we're seeing 4 new waves of innovation that are going to be the seeds of an even bigger productivity revolution in the next 5 to 10 years. That's measurement, experimentation, sharing, and replication. In each of these areas, IT is driving an innovation revolution that is just enormous. Let's take the first one, measurement. Throughout history, virtually every great scientific breakthrough has been preceded by a revolution in measurement. Think of the way the microscope led to the germ theory when Anton van Leeuwenhoek first allowed people to see what was inside a drop of water or a blood cell. Today, businesses have before them an equally powerful set of tools that are allowing companies to measure what's going on with their customers, as Frank was alluding to, inside the organization, with the suppliers. I'm talking about the nanodata and nowcasting revolution, reality mining, things like clickstream data, Google Trends, RFID, Twitter feeds, mobile location data. Each of these is generating terabits of information that in principle can be analyzed. Most of it hasn't been yet, but in principle it gives us a level of resolution and insight into what's happening in companies that's just unprecedented. And I'm quite confident that as we learn better how to manage it, a lot of the work we're doing at MIT, at the Center for Digital Business, is based on that. We'll be able to get a quantum improvement in our understanding, and that's going to drive innovation and productivity. Similarly, with experimentation, sharing, and replication, each of those we're seeing, I think, equally important revolutions, and the 4 of them together are quite synergistic. So I'm quite optimistic that we actually have just seen the tip of the iceberg when it comes to productivity improvements.
Frank?
I agree with you. I think that, I think we have to view, I think information technology professionals have to understand and grasp the fact that they're no longer really in control. And when I was in the business, in fact, how I sold Tivoli was this puts you in control. And whether it was in control of your data, your security, your privacy, your systems administration, your applications, it was all about information technology putting people in control, putting IT people and business people in control. You're not in control, get over it. Your job, I would think, is no longer about getting into control. It's about recognizing that most of the value in your company is actually being created outside your company, either by customers or by your employees who now live a life that has only partially to do with what they do inside the company. They're all either currently or they're going to be on social media networks. They're already communicating and connecting. You don't need to do that. They're grasping huge amounts of data. And if you just look at your typical MIT or college kid today, they are as adept at managing huge amounts of data and information as IT departments were 10, 15, 20 years ago. I think the real question could be, for information technology, how do you change your job so it's no longer about being in control, but in some sense optimizing these tools that the employees of your company have and connecting them with customers. And from what I've been able to see, information technologists need to educate themselves much more on what these tools are. So I know it's a very simple and probably a naive thing to say, but going out of here, if you don't have a Facebook page and you're not on Facebook, please get on it. If you don't Twitter, you don't have to, but you don't have to do it yourself, but watch it. And I think if you understand the tools that a typical college freshman uses in terms of managing their life, it's absolutely outstanding. And I think you're going to have to realize that these people will be in your workforce and they will be the customers of your workforce, and then figure out what your role is. And I'm afraid I don't have a magic answer, but I don't think it's to get in control or increase productivity. I think it's to increase understanding, to change behavior, and to empower your people to use these tools and to understand them in the best possible way.
I think, Jeanne, what I heard both Eric and Frank talking about is an IT world which is less focused on automating processes and more focused on people who are generating data and trying to make some sense of that data. That seems like a tremendous challenge, though, right?
Oh, certainly. And I think it's interesting. I think we better be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I think this idea that we need to expand our thinking about our role here and look for the opportunities to innovate and to use new media is critical. I would argue that that underlying control, the way we get the freedom to do that, is to have some kind of underlying control. And so we want to be very, very clear about that set of things we are going to control. And we don't need for it to be all that big. But we do have, in most of our organizations, a set of sacred transactions. Let's get those right. Let's build that platform, and that should give us the freedom to innovate, to release people. I mean, if we look at Google or Apple and we say, wow, where does all of that innovation come from? It comes from providing one powerful platform that other people can build on. And our question is, how do we translate that into to the typical consumer products goods company or the typical airline? How do you build that core platform and then just set people free? But it would be, I think, to get back to your point, Jason, in that platform, we're going to make the right data available. We have to find a way to take that transaction data and the increasing number of sources of data that Eric was identifying. We have to find a way to capture that data and make it readily available. That's what should free the organization for innovation. And I think that is very much the CIO's role going forward.
Marilyn, what are the sacred transactions at MIT that have to take place?
Well, we have to be able to pay our people. I would say that would be a sacred transaction.
I would appreciate that.
We're all here with that one.
We're out with you.
It's not that much anyway, though. What's the big deal?
I couldn't agree more with Jeanne. I think that what my comment about operational excellence before was about taking those platforms and those transactions and bringing operational excellence to them to free up for innovation. But I do want to make a comment about the business process redesign we were talking about. I know we said it started in the 90s, and I think some people think, well, we're done. Well, we just had a question from someone before who talked about changing business models, legacy business models, and legacy systems. And we all have them everywhere. And I think what we have to do is realize there's still a lot of work to do, but it's important for the IT and their customers, their business customers, to do that work together. And for the IT folks to understand their business customers and where they're coming from, and for the business to be able to walk in their shoes, if you will. And the same with business customers and IT, to work more closely together. And at the same time, we're doing this maybe more creative business process redesign, or move to business process models. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Some of our legacy systems can be renewed and renovated, and to promote interoperability and integration with both the systems and the business processes going forward. Easy words to say, harder to do it. But it makes our jobs interesting going forward.
Perhaps I could throw out a question, thank you, Madeline, to the entire panel. So they've all talked glowingly of the innovations that a modern IT organization can provide the larger company organization. And perhaps they could give me some specifics. I'm a journalist, I like specifics, of the kinds of investments that modern CIOs are making that are creating specific kinds of innovation. So tell me some stories, and tell the audience some stories about how a creative approach to information technology frees the organization. Anyone?
I'll start, and I want to start with Campbell Soup, because it's 140 years old, which means they've been doing the same thing longer than we have at CISR, and they make soup. And I think what's interesting about this case is that even Campbell Soup is thinking about innovation and using technology to do it. And the way they did it was to find 3 core processes that they said kind of embodied these sacred transactions we're talking about. So it was account to report, make to ship, order to cash. Just get those in. Make sure everybody in the organization is doing them well. And then talk to the entire organization about one single metric, to get back to Eric's point. And that metric was total delivered cost. In short, it's total revenue, total expenses divided by number of cans of soup sold. And basically they said to the entire organization, your job is to make sure that never goes up again. It's flat forever. And so they have in there now this platform of core processes that are operationally excellent, to Marilyn's point. And then they've asked every individual to think about, how do we perform better? And what they've learned is they do that by professionalizing every single person in the company. So for example, during the process of putting in make to ship and order to cash, the purchasing agents at each of their 26 North American plants became responsible for viewing the entire pipeline and understanding what they needed and cutting costs and improving the product flow. And what they found is these people wanted to rise to the occasion. The next thing they were doing was creating the social networks, so they were all talking with one another, and they had to equip them with tools for doing that. Then they had to take them all on their first conference. All the purchasing agents go to Myrtle Beach, and for the first time ever, they said, wait a minute, I am a professional here at Campbell Soup, designing new ways for this company to excel. I think that kind of mix of platform, innovation, social media, professionalization of the workforce, I think that embodies what great companies are going to do.
Tell me a story, Eric.
Sure, okay. We've been talking about data and how important that is. And there are a number of companies that have changed their culture to become more data-driven. Like some of them were born that way. You look at say, a Google or an Amazon, and they've always been very data-driven. But one that I like is I had a colleague at the MIT PhD program in economics, Gary Loveman, who went off to become CEO of Harrah's. And I like what he did there in terms of changing the culture to become much more data-driven. Historically, decisions at Harrah's, like at most organizations, were made by getting the smart people together in a room, and they discuss it over, and then they would go with the HIPPO, which Ron Kohavi coined that term. It's an acronym standing for the highest paid person's opinion. So that was the standard approach. But they've become much more data-driven. Interestingly, they already had the data when he arrived, but he got them to really start using it much more intensively. And now they do dozens of experiments continuously with their customers, with their employees, with their suppliers, to understand what really drives profitability on costs in terms of customer satisfaction. They have a whole suite of metrics, and they're constantly refining those metrics. So when decisions are made today, it's not who's got the intuition, who's got the hunch, who's got the feel for the customer. It's what do the numbers really say. And the thing that's different from just the measurement that I was talking about before is this idea of controlled experiments. At MIT, scientists know that if you really want to get at causality, you can't just look at retrospective data. You have to have a treatment group and a control group so you can know how the conditions are varying and do it in a systematic way. At Harrah's, they have Gary says there are two ways you can get yourself fired. One is if he finds you stealing from the company. The other is if he finds you running an experiment without a proper control group. Now, the first of those has been around for centuries, but I think that second one is an innovation that we're seeing in more and more companies, starting with a lot of the web-based and software companies, and I think cloud computing has made it easier, but we're seeing it more and more in bricks and mortar companies, and even at Harrah's, they think they're only in early stages of this transformation.
Were there any real surprises about Harrah's business they didn't anticipate?
Oh, doesn't it? They were a third-tier struggling company, and they are now the largest company. They found, one of the most important lessons I think they found was how different customers are from each other. That a one-size-fits-all policy really didn't work. So they really micro-target each. They have different promotions for each specific individual based on their past behavior. Everyone gets these Harrah's total rewards cards. I have one. He gave me one. And so he knows what it is that it would take me to move marginally and what other people. And it's different for each person. And being able to target at that level has been the difference maker.
This experimental approach to data is widely applicable to sectors outside of what we normally think of as business. If anyone in the audience hasn't read a profile in this week's New Yorker of Esther Duflo, who heads the Poverty Lab.
Right, and she just won the award, the Clark Medal.
It's an amazing piece. So she applies experimental methods to study what kinds of international aid actually do lift people out of poverty. And she's taken a Knight's move on the board about international aid, no longer discussing whether it works in principle or not. She looks at whether or not specific programs work. And it turns out almost everything we thought we knew about international aid and poverty is wrong. So it's a great piece, and you should read it.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. It just shows how this phenomena is sweeping all sorts of fields, and it's a real recognition for the economics profession to award the Clark Medal for the best economist under the age of 40 to someone who's driving experiments and having real policy changes as opposed to trying to retreat to the room and think deep thoughts about how the world should be.
Frank, can you tell me a story about an interesting innovation out of this new approach to IT that the Media Lab is proud of or interested in or excited by?
Yeah, we've got many, but I'm going to kind of change the focus of the conversation from a particular project to a way of doing business. Industry sponsors the Media Lab, and they come and they watch what we do and they participate to get ideas. And I've noticed that over the past 2 or 3 years, actually, more and more information technology people have been showing up. Used to be a lot of marketing people, sales people, mostly product and technology people. And what they've been looking for, I think, are new ways of understanding their customers. And that's been the big theme. And they realize that, as you've said, there's a huge amount of information out there now, data about people and customers, and how do you understand it. But I think that the thing that fascinates me about what they've done is they've looked at what we do at the Media Lab, which in many ways is very different than anything you'd ever look at as an IT professional. And you get an idea to do something serendipitously that had nothing to do with what you were doing in the first place. And this kind of serendipitous invention typically was the domain of product people and engineers and software people and inventors. But now serendipitous invention, now IT people need to understand this process. So I'll give you 2 examples that surprised me. One is, let me start with a project called affective computing, which is a whole area at the Media Lab Professor Roz Picard has run on how technology can understand people's emotions and you can design technology that better recognizes how people are thinking about it. And early on, Professor Picard was looking at things like Windows and saying, how can you keep the design of Windows from making people angry when it gives you the notification? For example, a little paper clip.
She's taking on the hard problems there.
She takes on the hard problems. And that was a technologist. And so the designers at Microsoft and IBM and Cisco were interested in this kind of technology.
Yeah.
But then she went on to work with kids with autism. And how kids with autism could actually understand the emotions of people who they're speaking to so they can better connect and communicate. And a whole project dealing with that and providing prosthetics that enable kids to communicate. Well, a number of our sponsors came through about 2 years ago or 3 years ago and looked at this and said, how can I use this technology? And these were IT people who were working on behalf of their customer care units or marketing units and say, how can I use this technology? PepsiCo saw it. And then outfitted the people who were doing their marketing for tasty snacks, Frito-Lay, with these devices that they could spread throughout the world. And as people were tasting these snacks, it would automatically feed back to a central location what they were doing, dramatically cutting down on the number of people you needed to send around the world when you wanted to launch a new snack. And also probably understanding better about how people felt about this new snack. So there you go from affective computing and a very technical application to integrating it into what you're doing. A second is Professor Deb Roy studies machine learning. And he began by trying to understand how kids learn language by putting video cameras in his home and videotaping, in a sense, in a very high resolution, the life of his child from the moment he was brought home till the age of 3. To watch every movement around the child, everything that was said, everything that impinged, because this is what machine learning people and psychologists thought they needed to learn about language. Well, the Bank of America came in and others who designed retail spaces and said, how can I use this technology for capturing images and sound to better understand what my customers are doing in retail spaces? You know, and when they look at a product, how do they react? How do I arrange my retail spaces? Even in the bank's case, how often does a teller go out to help a customer at the ATM? And in doing so, they noticed through this kind of technology that it was way too often and taking way too much time. So my point is not a specific technology, but that I think IT will be transformed in terms of serving both your internal customers as well as external by looking at technologies that you have never looked at or thought about before.
Frank, would you feel comfortable in saying a few words about Sandy Pentland's research, which does exactly what we're talking about, looks at people and data, in his case, in mobile networks as an epidemiological problem?
Yeah. Well, Sandy Pentland has been looking at the question of how sensors and networks can be used to understand people's behavior for 25 years. He's really a psychologist, yeah. But his whole practice study has been enhanced by the availability of cell phones now, mobile technology, context-aware computing. And his students have outfitted a number of employees at a German bank, for example, with sensors that can actually determine who they're speaking to, where they are at any point during the day. And he looked at patterns of interactions, kind of like physical groupware. What were people doing in the real world, in the physical world? And this information that he collected revealed for a particular, they were announcing a product within the bank, very counterintuitive patterns between who talked to whom, and actually how you could then change the flow of work within sales, marketing, customer support to actually better optimize the flow of ideas. And he did that by understanding his customer, who were these employees at the bank in sales, marketing, customer support. So same thing. If you can better understand your customer using these technologies, where your customer may be your employees, then that's how to improve productivity. But it's different from, and with all due respect, the sacred transaction. Yeah. Because the sacred transaction is occurring here between people in the company who are creating ideas and new products. And I think those are the most sacred transactions that a company has to think about in the future.
And finally, Marilyn, could you talk about maybe an innovation that you and I are proud of?
Absolutely, that's what I was going to talk about. I just have a couple of comments. First, I'm hearing some trends here, as probably all of you are too. The trends are more use of data and more tools to get us that data, and to be able to not just access it, but understand and interpret it. And also empowering people and self-service. And a lot of the applications we're doing right now, and I've only been there a short time, but there's one that we are very proud of, are self-service type applications, from administration, finance and HR, to student systems at MIT, all focusing on empowering people and promoting self-service and mobility. And maybe last year, before I got there, we built a web platform and put some of the basic information for the university on it. And the news office approached us and said that they were looking for an iPhone application. So we took that web platform. They were a tough crowd. I think you gave us 2 months to develop it, but we did it. And actually, I visited with CIOs of other universities, and we won't be ahead for long, but we're going to try to stay ahead. And actually, people can walk around campus with their iPhones, and of course, many people have iPhones at MIT, and they can access their news, they can access their schedules, they can access their courses, and we're actually now enriching that application, and the news office was our sponsor for that.
So I have a number of roles at MIT, and what Marilyn's talking about is some work I did with her at the MIT news office, where we created an iPhone app for the university that is unique to MIT, that was a collaboration between a publishing arm of the university and IS&T. If you've got an iPhone, download the MIT iPhone app. It is really cool, it's unique. 10,000 people every week are reading news and finding out about MIT and navigating MIT using the iPhone app. It's a really, really cool thing. I am about to go and throw questions open to the audience. So if you'll begin lining up at the 2 microphones, you can ask your questions. And while you prepare your questions, I'm going to ask one question to the panelists. So they've talked bewitchingly about a more people-centered approach to IT, about collecting data from the audience, understanding it, being experimental, being innovative. But it occurs to me, particularly with all the news in the moment about Facebook, that there are privacy concerns about all of this. Almost 15 years ago, Scott McNealy, the then CEO of Sun, said that privacy was dead and we should get over it. Companies like Facebook set themselves up on that operating principle, and there seems to have been a real community pushback against that. So perhaps if the panelists could say, what are the reasonable expectations of users for the privacy of their data, and how do you protect it?
Well, I think part of it is having flexibility. And when Frank mentioned getting on Facebook, I felt like I should make sure, put in the caveat that make sure you check the privacy settings. As some of you may have heard, the privacy statement at Facebook is longer than the US Constitution. There are several hundred
140 separate little options. Yeah.
Exactly, you can set. And I think that the concern is not that there are 140 settings that you can have, it's that a lot of people aren't aware of how to I mean, I think there are people who are concerned just about that, but my personal concern is that there's so many people who are ignorant of what they're putting out there, and they think that things are private when they're not. But I think that it's almost inevitable that we're going to have more and more situations where people have 140 or more toggles. I remember teaching a course over a decade ago where we discussed how privacy was shifting from something that was constrained by physical law, the fact that you know, your mortgage may be a matter of public record, but I don't know what it is right now. It used to be you'd have to go to the town hall. Very soon, I'm going to be able to get a little device, whether it's an iPhone or something on a heads-up display in my glasses, where I can look at you and get your criminal record, your mortgage record, and everything just instantaneously. So physical constraints aren't going to prevent me from seeing that information. Instead, we're going to have a set of conscious decisions, what we want to share and what we don't want to share at the individual level, like with the Facebook toggles, and at the organizational level in terms of what's inside and outside the firewall, and at a societal level in terms of what laws we have. It's going to be a lot of work to make those decisions explicitly that previously were made for us by physics.
Do I own my data? And if I don't, what rights do I have over it? So, Frank? Marilyn? So, do I own my MIT data?
Well, that's a good question.
Yeah.
It is the data, your private data, the confidential data about you, of course you own that data, the data about you yourself, your social security number, your date of birth, et cetera. MIT has taken, and I mean, this is a big topic.
Yeah.
I'm
sorry to go through it on you.
Even being there a short time, I could probably talk for a long time about some of the actions we've taken. We've got encryption. We sponsor Kerberos, which most people know. We've got passwords, and there's a new regulation, excuse me, that was passed in Massachusetts recently for privacy of personal data, and requires encryption of laptops, and we're moving along in that, starting with IS&T, and then hopefully moving to the rest of the university. Google actually automatically encrypts every laptop that it provides all of its employees, for example. So we are very aware of the sharing of data, and we're very, very careful with what we share and what we don't share. I would say MIT owns its data, but then you could get into which data is your data, which data is MIT data, and we probably need a lot more than an hour.
I think my point was made. This is a tremendously culturally unresolved issue.
Yes.
As to Eric's point, which we're going to have to think through in an intelligent way.
I can make one comment and observation. It's a hugely complicated issue, and I think IT needs to, information technologists have to be educators. They have to learn all about it and the complexities of this and see their role not as being protecting data within the organization only, which you have to do, but educating like you would your kids. And I've been doing that recently, and you need to educate you need to become an educational group. The other thing I would just observe, if you look at, say, medical data and your ownership of that, or financial data, the thing I've observed at the lab in our projects is that there's one question of privacy and ownership. The second question is your ability to interpret that data. And if you look at your medical data today, your doctor is able to interpret it, you are not. Your financial data, your investment banker, your counselor, some others are able to do that, you are not. So I think the big issue is not going to be privacy. I think that will be an issue, but ultimately whether or not individuals are able to make sense and use their data to improve their own life. And it's the use of that data that's, I think, going to be the big battle for the 21st century, and enabling people to actually understand and comprehend that.
Well, that's interesting. So transparency and usability, which has always been a challenge and a responsibility of IT departments, turns out to be important in privacy as well. If you will say who you are, and if you will ask a question. Statements are acceptable, but questions are better. This gentleman here.
My name is Mike Matlube. I'm the CIO of Connolly Incorporated. We're a financial services company in the business of auditing. Really two questions, discussion points. First is managing a distributed innovation process and how to maintain the visibility over that, where events are being caught at the right time to have, a cohesive architecture organizationally. So the balance of, yes, you can do it, empowering you, and not having some business app ending up, not supporting an international business. The second part is the balance of, empowerment for communication with the need to protect, and you guys were just talking about it, data and confidential information that you may have in your organization, specifically medical records in my case. So, how do you give people access to phones and Facebook and keep it safe?
So let's see if I can formulate the question. So the question is, all these things sound great, but they have concomitant costs and risks. And how does a modern IT department balance the two?
Well, also I want to pick up on the first part he said, which is about the distributed innovation. And I think it comes back to something that Jeanne and Frank were talking about. And you heard a little tension there in terms of the thing. And I think it's embodied in your question as well, that it's something that another colleague of mine, Tom Malone, calls the paradox of standards, which is that sometimes in order to create more freedom and distributed innovation, you also have to have some core area where you do have some standardizations and commonality. And I see that there's a whole set of these paradoxes between centralization and decentralization, empowerment and control, innovation and standardization, center and edge. And you sometimes get advocates for one side or the other seeing the sweep in one direction, and there are a lot of powerful technologies and forces towards, you can look at the underlying economics that drive you very convincingly towards more distribution or more decentralization or the edge. At the same time, there are some equally powerful forces in the other direction. And I think you have to embrace the fact that both things are happening simultaneously, and the art is working out which components you're going to standardize around. I mean, I think probably the most classic example of all is probably the internet and TCP/IP. The reason that we can have so much innovation in applications and business models, as not to mention in underlying substrate and ways of communicating, is because in the middle there's this quite rigid set of standards that allow all those components to interoperate. Similarly, in organizations, if you can have an innovation in a business model and then embed that in some enterprise software, you can replicate it to dozens or hundreds of other locations and amplify the power of that innovation proportionately. So the power really comes from balancing those and being artful about where you create more freedom and where you create more standardization.
Yeah.
Yes, please, yeah.
No, I just really agree with that, and I think in some ways we're finally able to do what Charles Handy suggested we should be able to do around 1990 when he said, when we manage, we're really managing the donut. In the middle is this ring of objectives that we need to make very, very clear what we expect people to do, who our customer is, how we want to serve them. And this outer ring is our constraints, which more and more we can build into business rules. And everything in between is the white space, and we expect people to do the right thing in there. If we've built these two rings well, if they're very clear, if they're not too permeable, then people will do the right thing. And I think of kind of the contrast between what I've been talking about, what Frank's been talking about. We go out now, we have so many more ways to learn about our customers, to understand our employees, to communicate with one another. But in the end, we have to build some of those things into business rules that tell people what the boundaries are. And I think that's how we kind of merge some of these, or kind of resolve some of the tensions that Eric's talking about.
Let's try and get as many questions as we can, Frank, unless you...
Oh, I just had a quick thing. Kind of at the Media Lab, we try and manage distributed innovation because we work with sponsors from throughout the world, and they're coming and going, so it's kind of distributed. One of the things we've found, it's just a very pragmatic thing, has nothing to do with the internet or TCP/IP or any of that kind of thing. It's just innovation occurs when you bring people together with different ideas, and you expose them to each other's stories. And I think you see so many tools on the internet today. We create a podcast that we distribute throughout our organization as well as to our sponsors that tell the story of how an innovation came about or something that's happening somewhere. So all these tools, whether it's YouTube, Facebook, social media, that enable people to tell their story and to get it out to others, actually increases the flow of information, which leads to innovation and connections. So creating those connections using the tools to enable everybody to tell each other their stories is, I think, the way to catalyze new ideas in an organization.
This gentleman here.
Hi, Greg Hansen, Advanced Micro Devices. I think I have a question for Dr. Ross. I'm trying to wrap my head around how this concept of sacred transactions and stable platforms enable IT departments to enable innovation. It seems logically to be just the opposite, that with the rise of cloud computing and social computing, that really we should be planning for disorganization and unstable.
I totally agree, but I think that the way we position ourselves for the instability and to take advantage of the things that Frank is talking about. By the way, I think these are really exciting things, and we all need to be able to absorb them, but in organizations that have thousands of people, we don't want to just say, hey, everybody go do whatever you want to do. So the idea of the stable platform is it's a base. I mean, it's very much like Amazon building this platform for retail online and then saying, let's go innovate. Let's try a different product, a different market, and a different way of interacting with our customers. Let's just build on those all the time, and let's assume that everyone in this organization will innovate. But it starts by our saying, here's the platform, here's the rules, and we're going to keep an eye on all this. So when organizations put in things like SAP, which looks like the opposite of what we're talking about here, they're just building a platform that says, here are our sacred transactions, and they will make sure, we will protect those. We'll make sure the data is safe. We will make sure the data is available. And thus, we can go off and do some of the really creative things because we know the boundaries on which we can build them. Does that address the question?
I would actually like to add to what Jeanne just said, because if you think about MIT, where a lot of this innovation is that they're talking about is taking place, if we didn't have the MIT network and we weren't supporting it day in and day out, and if it went down every once in a while, to me, that's a sacred network, sacred transaction. So a lot of our infrastructure, plus the systems that do our basic, like the payroll, like the student systems, to be able to register. Now, certainly, we need to make these things available on a mobile platform, and the students are going to be using Facebook and plenty of other tools. But if we didn't have the basic systems up and running for thousands of students and faculty, these folks would not be able to do the innovation, or maybe they'd find a way. But,
no, but well,
it makes it easier for you.
You know what they would do? They would do the innovation, but that's great. But that's not everything. That's not the end. As Steve Jobs once said, real artists ship. And so it's great to have the innovations, but you also want to deliver the value. And in a research lab, it's one thing, but if in an organization, when the team at CVS comes up with a better prescription drug ordering system, or the team at HBSC comes up with a better way of interacting with their customers in one particular branch, the part of the value is that they can then embed that in some enterprise software and other tools, and have an infrastructure where they can scale that very rapidly. Animoto took an innovation and scaled it up from 25,000 users to 250,000 users in 1 week, in part because they had some stable networks. In that case, they were using cloud computing. So it's the combination. You got to understand both parts of this tension. And yes, we are at MIT. We're all very much in favor of innovation, but you also want to be able to translate that into value.
Yeah, I would just say, having sold to and worked with IT departments, at any given point in time, sacred transactions could consume all of your resources plus 50%. And they usually do. So the way I would kind of compromise on this thing or think about it is, I think it used to be that you think about 80% of your transactions being sacred and maybe 20% serendipitous. But now I think you've got to get to the reverse of that, which means that I think IT organizations have to negotiate with their businesses on what are the sacred transactions and the priorities, customer data, all the things that are important for employees. But I think if you don't reduce that, you're going to spend all your time continuing to have your hair on fire dealing with those sacred transactions and not get to this new style. And I think it's just a question of mind share and focus. And I think you've got to be disciplined in trying to reduce that. Otherwise, it will consume all your efforts, as it always does.
Yeah.
This gentleman here.
Hi, I'm Terry McCormick. I'm sort of what you would call an R&D business architect. For the past decade or two, I've been helping biotech firms improve the returns and processes on their R&D processes, increasingly utilizing information more effectively. And one of the things I'm bringing up, which is sort of like related to the privacy issue, is that I'm seeing people get cautious about getting the value out of the information, and the new technologies that are available are powerful. But the pushback is that there is sort of like what you call legal discovery issues, and then the next level beyond it, which is understanding the implications of the data. So I'd appreciate the panel's comments about this dynamic that may actually affect innovation and utility of information, not just in that industry, but overall, because in certain societies we're very litigious, and how will innovation and information flows, balance that out, and also will it flow in other geographical areas, because maybe innovation will be constrained by such challenges.
Would you like to take a shot?
Shall I take it?
Yes, please.
It's a huge issue because as systems become more open and our society is more litigious, and I encounter this in my work with physicians and clinicians and medical organizations when talking about making medical records more available to their patients. And it's a big issue. And I think the only answer to that ultimately is going to be what I said before. If you can prove that society as a whole, the business itself, will benefit from that so strongly by innovations that really push the envelope so different that they change the curve completely, then I think those things will become edge issues. The risk will become edge issues. I think before you see, and businesses see, and individuals see the huge transformative benefits that can come from empowering people to use that information, they're going to kind of fall back on the risk. It's human nature. If you don't see why you should do this, then the risk itself is going to impair your ability to do it. So in using medical information, we've got to show a huge change that occurs when you empower patients and open this up. The same thing is true in finance. It's all about off-the-charts innovation that are going to change people's attitudes to what can be done.
And I think that's exactly right. And part of the way we change people's attitudes as an economist is changing incentives and institutions. Right. Take insurance. Right now, it could be extremely costly to your financial health if an insurance company finds out adverse information about you, and therefore then you lose your, because of the way we have things structured. Or hospitals may not want to share information because of their competitive positioning. At the VA, the different hospitals are relatively seamless in sharing information because they're not competing with each other. At Partners, which is titularly one big organization, the different hospitals, Mass General and the Brigham, don't share data records. They're not compatible because of the different profit centers. So depending on how you set up the incentives, different people can be benefit or hurt from sharing the information. So it's not surprising that they will guard it and treat it differently depending on whether making it available to another party can adversely affect their own interests. So by cleverly and intelligently designing our institutions, we can change the way people share information. It's not just a matter of job owning and saying, you've got to change your attitude. It's a matter of changing the actual payoffs to different parties at the individual and institutional level.
Our hosts are hovering off stage.
One last question. A good friend of mine is standing at the microphone. I'll never live it down.
My name is Jeanne. I work with emerging technologies and emerging markets. The last panel, one of the audience members mentioned that it may be time to change the organizational model, the business model, that it seems to be changing. And I think with communications network, social network, computing network, we talked about process automation. So in a company where you have to have hiring and purchasing and all of those, if we look at the platforms as a way of a process, and that these processes can be given away and the company focuses on just the part that it does for building value, are we there yet? I mean, are we there that 20% for building value is all that the company can do with all these technologies that are there? I mean, I think we shouldn't have to worry about figuring out how to hire in a different country and, so that's the question. Where are we in the sense of a new business model for the typical functions that exist in almost every company, and we spend as much time on that as the main part?
I think that's a great question. And I actually think all the tools are in place that we could have, first of all, simpler organizations, and secondly, business models where we really focus on a much narrower value proposition. And I think it's really legacy that is preventing that. I don't think it's that we can't do it. It's just that that's not historically what we've done. We've now built these huge and complex organizations, and it just takes a long time to undo them. I think we're much more likely to see the business models you're describing. I think we are seeing the business models you're describing in new organizations. It'll be very interesting to see what happens to the old. Richard Branson at Virgin was saying that when his companies get bigger than 200 people, he breaks them up. And that's his way of keeping them simple. And if we think about information now as an integrating mechanism and stop saying we have to integrate across all these complex organizations, rather we can just have a lot of different organizations with the kind of the basic data, and they share that as opposed to some higher power saying share it. I think that we have the potential to be to offer the kind of organizations you're talking about, and we'll evolve there. That would be my guess.
So let me disagree with
okay.
Jeanne. Are we there yet? No, and we're never going to get there. It's not a goal that we're going to eventually get there. We'll be able to sit back and say, "Phew, finally done. We've got the organization figured out." We should embrace the fact that just as we're talking about innovating products and services, we're going to be innovating business models and processes hopefully forever, because that's what ultimately drives continuing progress and continuing improvements in living standards, is that we keep innovating. And I think we're still at a very early stage of all this. The technology is an enabler for all of this, but in my research, it's maybe 10 or 20% of the total investment. The big investment is rethinking what we do with the technology, the way we interact with our customers, suppliers, the business models. That's the opportunity. And is it complicated? Yes, it's incredibly complicated, but that's also good news, because you know what? If it was easy and everybody was doing it, there'd be no competitive advantage, there'd be no profit in there. The reason that you in this room are going to be able to beat your competitors is because you are understanding a very complicated problem at a level beyond what other people are, and that is a source of advantage. So I say, no, we're not there yet, but embrace it. That's great news. That's what makes it fun, and that's what we're going to continue to be pushing forward against.
And on that note, please, very quickly.
The speaker's off. In places like Africa or remote areas where you don't have any of that, there's no legacy, there's no structure, it's just a mobile. You can literally operate a business on a mobile phone using apps like you were talking about. So I think in an environment where there's nothing, it might be easier just because there is no legacy. But that was just...
Well, that's the start, but that's not the end.
And on that note, I would like to say what I have learned is that though sacred transactions are at the core of an IT organization's basic trust with its customers, a more data-oriented and people-oriented approach allows the serendipity that creates innovation. And I would like to thank my panels.
Thank you.